C'est le pays même sur ma vie. Something like such. Birth. Loss of mercy. Can be. Thing. Refuge me.
we are, I'll be sharing shortly so you can follow in, but we are on 336. Hello, everyone. How are you doing today? Welcome to the Quarantine Collective's ongoing, eternal reading of Anti-Oedipus. We are, let me make sure I'm sharing the page properly in the Discord. We'll get to that in the YouTube in just 2 seconds. We are continuing as we continue to make through the Death Instinct. I know, it's a shock. Is everyone stunned? I know you are. Why is the stream at such shit quality? One sec, I just need to make sure it's streaming at more than 480p. I don't know why it's only doing 480p. Is that just for me or is it for everyone? Nope, no, it's doing more. Weird, the preview stream is only at 480p. It's very strange. It's frustrating. What can I say? You know, what are you going to do, right?
1440p, 60 FPS.
Yeah, in the preview window, it was only doing 480 for me, so whatever. That's fine. That's annoying. It is what it is. Let me make sure I go back to the preview now, so that way I can keep track of the stream not falling apart slowly. All right. As I said, we are in the middle of 336, a significant paragraph 2 or 3, as we make our way through all of this. Whew. Where do I start to prep this before I switch over to the pages that have we'll get that moving. But this is a bear. This is a bear of a thing. We'll go there and make sure that this there it is. Excellent. Where do we start? Okay. So we are in Schizoanalysis. I'm not trying to redo the entire goddamn book, of course, but we are going to be talking about the death instinct. And death is something that they've been going over for 5 or 6 paragraphs now in pretty significant fashion. And what they're doing is talking about, first, what we mean when we tend to say death, how we talk about death, and how Freud talks about the death instinct. In death, we tend to talk about sort of the cessation of life, and we try to define life as the counter to death, blah, 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 things like that. But there's a specific way that we kind of end up with death, or how we talk about it. And they want us to begin thinking about it slightly differently. Thinking about it instead of this large molar formation that we are, this large formation of an individual or a human or an ego. Instead, thinking about the processes underneath all of that. And the processes underneath all of that are almost always dying. There's a continuity to things, sure, but the process, as they reference in Klosowski's Nietzsche and the Vicious Circle, which we ended up reading the last 3 Saturdays maybe 4. It's an important section. It goes through this sort of process where we return momentarily. The sort of ego or the person is constantly moving back towards the model of things and then back to the emergence of things. So some experience happens and then returns back to the model of stability. And for them, it's the model of death. And that's kind of the big deal. Ben, we can totally hear through your mic, by the way. Ben, gotta give it a mute, my friend.
I'm getting there.
Okay. So that continuous back and forth of the, emergence of life and then the model of something that sort of ceases production and then back to production. This oscillation is between, as they're talking about it, sort of life and death, as they mean their drives, the connection and the model of things. And this back and forth is a consistent dying that's happening within us. That's what's happening within everything. I use the example over and over that there's thirsty Brooks, but then at some point, thirsty Brooks, which is a subjectivity of sorts, drinks some water. I got my Pocari Sweat. I'd give it a drink. And thirsty Brooks slowly dies. It's taking a little bit longer this morning for me, but at some point I'm not thirsty anymore. And it is a little bit like the dad joke. Dad, I'm thirsty. Hi, thirsty, I'm dad. Like that kind of shit. But it's, I am thirsty. I am hungry. I am wanting. I am sad. I am angry. These things end. And these are deaths. That subjectivity dies. That thing dies. That moment dies. Those intensities cease. What death actually is, like the actual death, the thing when we see the end of a person's life, it's actually when they stop dying. Because there's kind of a cessation of all processes, and death is one of those. When they stop dying, that's kind of the model for death we've created for ourselves over time. And so Freud sort of made this mistake by calling it the death instinct, because it's not really that. That's not really what's happening, that there is a continuous back and forth. There's a continuous sort of shuffling of things. And so the way that they are sort of bringing it through, and they've been talking through the way that death operated within the first two socii that they talk about, the primitive and the despotic. Sorry, I haven't gotten my tea in me fully this morning. We're moving to capital, and that's kind of where we're at. One second. That is, I shared the wrong screen with Discord. That's okay. My brain is just running a little slower than normal this morning, because we want to share this one. There. So just sort of to go back and say a handful of bits. Freud himself spoke of the link between his discovery of the death instinct in World War I, which remains the model of capitalist war. More generally, the death instinct celebrates the wedding of psychoanalysis and capitalism. Their engagement had been full of hesitation. They've got lots of little cute lines in it like that. But they're really placing specifically the understanding we have of death, particularly within the space of how Freud came to speak of it, and how, overall, it exists within a very capitalist-focused framework, you could say. I hope that makes sense when I say that out loud, because it's going to be kind of the point of the next little bit that we're talking about here, to say the least. Move that back over. That should be generally okay. I just want to make sure it fits. This is getting to be a pain in the ass. I want to make sure this fits inside of this. That way it's easily readable. We can expand a little bit here. There. Making sure everyone can read, because it's a lot. I'll make sure everyone can see what I'm seeing too, because that's a pain in the ass. All right. So they say, what we have tried to show apropos of capitalism is how it inherited much from a transcendent death-carrying agency, the despotic signifier. The despotic signifier is one of death. The king orders death, controls life and death. The transcendent death-carrying agency that happened within that is moved to capital works differently. Again, these things aren't simply these simplistic sort of, oh, it's this all the time, but instead how it plays into this, and how within capital death is effuse in the full immanence of the full system. This is the big deal. It's that of capital money, the shift from the despotic on high giving controls of a life or death. Now capital, which is within everything, it's suppressing the distinction between production and anti-production, everywhere mixing these. And this shift to capitalism is kind of a big deal for the death instinct, because this is how Freud made these mistakes and made these calls, as he ended up doing. So let me adjust the camera a little bit so that way I can sit a little bit more centered. That made it worse. Good job, Brooks. There we go. So I can sit in the center of things, and let's try and make it a little larger. Sorry, I just want to make sure this records well, because I know we've had issues with that a little bit in the past. And then we'll just jump right in, which I think will be nice. All right. So they end the last paragraph with a a question semi-answer, and we'll kind of go with that. Once it is said that desiring production is itself a decoded and deterritorialized production, how do we explain that capitalism, with its axiomatic, its statistics, performs an infinitely vaster repression of this production than do the preceding regimes, which nonetheless did not lack the necessary repressive means? And that's the question. Why is it that it's even more repressive, yet there isn't a master signifier? These things don't exist in that way. The answer is the death instinct. If we call instinct in general the conditions of life that are historically and socially determined by the relations of production and anti-production in a system. We know that molar social production and molecular desiring production must be evaluated both from the viewpoint of their identity and nature and from the viewpoint of their difference in regime. But it could be that these two aspects, nature and regime, are in a sense potential and are actualized only in inverse proportion, which means that where the regimes are the closest, the identity and nature is on the contrary at its minimum, and where the identity and nature appears to be at its maximum, the regimes differ to the highest degree. If we examine the primitive or barbarian constellations, we see that the subjective essence of desire, as production, is referred to large objectivities, to the territorial or to the despotic body, which act as natural or divine preconditions that thus ensure the coding or the overcoding of the flux of desire by introducing them into systems of representations that are themselves objective. Hence, it can be said that the identity in nature between the two productions is completely hidden there, as much by difference between the objective socius and the subjective full body of desiring production, as by the difference between the qualified codes and overcodings of social production and the chains of decoding or of deterritorialization belonging to desiring production, and by the entire repressive apparatus represented in the savage prohibitions, the barbarian law, the right of anti-production. And yet, the difference in regime, far from being accentuated and deepened, is on the contrary reduced to a minimum, because desiring production as an absolute limit remains an exterior limit, or else stays unoccupied as an internal and displaced limit, with the result that the machines of desire operate on the side of their limit within the framework of the socius and codes. I did warn you it was a long paragraph. That is why the primitive codes and even the despotic overcodings testify to a polyvocity that functionally draws them nearer to a chain of decoding of desire. The parts of the desiring machine function in the very workings of the social machine. The flux of desire enter and exit through the codes that continue, however, to inform the model and experience of death that are elaborated in the unity of the socio-desiring apparatus. And it is even less a question of the death instinct to the extent that the model and the experience are better coded in a circuit that never stops grafting the desiring machines onto the social machines and implanting the social machine in the desiring machine. Death comes all the more from without as it is coded from within. This is especially true of the system of cruelty, where death is inscribed in the primitive mechanism of surplus value, as well as the movement of finite blocks of debt. But even in the system of despotic terror, where death becomes infinite, where death experiences an elevation that tends to make of it a latent instinct, there nonetheless subsists a model in the overcoding law and an experience for the overcoded subjects, at the same time as anti-production remains separate as the share owed to the overlord. Ready to go through line by line? Ready for it? There is just a fuck ton said here, but it's particular. It is very specifically going into how the death instinct and death becomes more central to capital because of how capital functions. That death is, in the primitive, if you remember, death is sort of a, whether you're going the Bataille direction or even just what they use in AO, death is something that is handled as part and parcel of existence. It is an order of things type thing for the primitive. Bataille wrote about the Aztecs. At length, they reference this. The Aztecs actually believed death to be a positive, not a loss. It was a net positive for society. And for the people, it was a blessing when death happened. Thus, their very fascinating culture. But also just around the world, death was just part and parcel of the thing that happened, and then they moved on. The death shifting to becoming a part of the despotic shifted where death comes from, how death appears, the order of things. We use the term primitive, Wig. Just to be specific, I'm using it in reference to the way they're talking about it, because it's prehistorical. So prehistorical tribes, but they do use the term primitive throughout the book. So I'm just sticking within the book. For the despot, because they are in control of all life, death, meaning everything that happens, they can have entire villages wiped out just by saying so. Death becomes something that is from without, from far away, sort of dictated. It shifts what it is. I mean, we're going to go over that because they talk about it in here. But with capital, death is sort of built in differently. It plays a different role. And this paragraph, despite being just a beast of one, does go through kind of the process of the whole things. Because it's about how the social machines and desiring machines operate together, where these things come together. So let's make our way bit by bit through it. The answer is the death instinct. If we call the death instinct in general the conditions of life that are historically and socially determined by the relations of production and anti-production in a system. So again, as I've sort of opened with, we're not talking about the biological death. That's not really interesting to them for just a ton of reasons. It becomes a determined thing at that point. Instead, we're talking about something that's socially and historically determined. What we talk about death, how we talk about death, is socially and historically determined. And that's what they're saying in this, that the death instinct is not this biological drive, but instead about how systems of production and anti-production play together. And they go on to say, we know that molar social production at large, molar production, and molecular, de minimis, desiring production must be evaluated both from the viewpoint of their identity in nature and from the viewpoint of difference in regime. So we need to be thinking about, and this is for capital always, basically, but you need to be considering almost two perspectives when you talk about production. There is the molar social production, the production that's happening at large. You can say factories, you can say memes, whatever you want, but it's at large, the way that people interact between people, more or less. But then there's the small scale desire-based molecular desiring production. And both of these have a nature that is both of these have a nature that you can compare against each other, and the difference in identity and the difference in regime, how far away they are from each other, you could say, in both of those kinds of becomes really important. And you'll hear this phrasing a lot through the rest of the chapter because of that. Because the way they say it, it could be that these two aspects, the nature and the regime of desiring production and social production, are in a sense potential and are actualized only in inverse proportions. When social production is fully expressed, for example, you might say, or actualized, and it's done fully, you might see that the other is minimized because it is something that is being actualized within social or within desiring production that has a minor blip in the social space. These things work counter to each other is the wrong word, but there is an inverse proportionality that they're talking about as they sort of come to be, if that makes sense. Yeah, I think that's how I'd phrase it. And then they go on to say, which means that where the regimes are closest, the identity in nature is, on the contrary, at minimum. Where the identity in nature appears to be at its maximum, the regimes differ to the highest degree. So this is a deeply counterintuitive sentence because, again, it's specific in how they frame it. When the identity in nature, and I'm not going to necessarily go into what each one is in nature. Again, there's an entire book we just read about this. But when you have social and desiring production as two things that are, as we've said, one is the other, really. It's social production is only desiring production under determined conditions. Desiring production is the molecular of social production. These things are similar. The identity in nature that you find between them, where it's at the minimum, the regimes are the closest. Where the regimes are closest, the identity in nature is on the contrary at its minimum. So the identity is not at all the same where they seem to be at their closest. And where identity in nature appears to be at its maximum, where they seem to be working the same, they differ to the highest degree. It's an inverse correlation, more or less, about identity and setup, because it's about how we sort of reference them. They give very particular versions of this, but this is a little bit of, for me, how I read this is them heading off at the pass, people who basically talk about them as if they behave identically, that desiring production and social production are the same. And they talk about social things as if it was just desiring production, or they talk about things that are happening within their psyche as social production. People fuck up the regimes, and this is them saying, please don't do that, more or less. More or less, this is them saying, please don't fuck that up. Because this is where they play. And then they give some examples. And this next little bit is them sort of walking through what they mean by that. So if we have the primitive or barbarian constellations, the socius, but they're not referring just to the socius here. They're talking about the constellation, the overall social organization that exists. We see that the subjective essence of desire as production is referred to large objectities, to the territorial or despotic body, which act as natural or divine preconditions that thus ensure the coding or overcoding of the flux of desire by introducing them into systems of representations that are themselves objective. The earth and the despot are the large objectities, the territorial, the earth, the despotic body, the despot, and again, the position, not the person, the position. These are large objectities. These are large social elements. These are the constellations of the social world. And they're saying these things are natural or divine preconditions, that their position socially ensures the coding or overcoding of desire by introducing the flows of desire, the flux of desire, into systems of representations that are themselves objective. And objective is an important word here. These things exist beyond just the subject, beyond the subjective. The way that the earth exists, what the despot says and what is written, what the rules of things are. We could debate all day about whether or not there are subjectivities in these things, but that's not really how these things operate. Both exist and play, and people in those spaces exist and play in worlds where the meaning is made as an objective standpoint. The despot says this, your job is to interpret it correctly. Not drastically different from the earth. The earth gives us bounty. We all agree. The shared system of social norms is the objectivity, the objective that is being sort of placed in there. These social patterns have these large objectivities that give us that larger meaning. That's the setup inside of the primitive and barbarian socius, right? Because desire is channeled through these large objectivities, these structures, these large things that code or overcode desire, that code or overcode this flux through an objective representation system. So everyone kind of knows what's going on, but everyone has the same sort of shared system there. Both of these do that. I'm going to say titties all the time, Shicey. It's objectivities is going to be Like object titties is going to be a thing I have to say a lot for like the next 4 or 5 paragraphs. What an awkward word. It's a terrible word. There's got to be a better word for objectity. There's got to be a better word for objectivity. But to continue, because this is the large objective thing that everyone is having their desire channeled through, that is forming these, again, at large and social, coming back, desire coded or over coded, this large scale thing. So when we're talking about the production of nature, the setup of desiring production and social production and how they operate, or where they seem like they operate the closest, they're actually the furthest, and where they seem like they're the furthest, they're the closest. You can kind of see what they're talking about. That doesn't sound like desiring production at all, I would say. That would be what I would say, right? I don't know about you. I would say those don't sound like desiring production. Yet, there's a closeness in how they operate that's very different. They go to say, it can be said the identity and nature between the two productions is completely hidden. There's much by the difference between the objective socius and the subjective full body of desiring production, as by the difference between the qualified codes and overcodings of social production in the chains of decoding and deterritorialization belonging to desiring production, and by the entire repressive apparatus represented on the savage prohibitions, the barbarian law and the rights of anti-production. Big fucking sentence, but big thing. But what we're talking about here is, again, think about social production and desiring production. The natural identity of both of these, or how we might see them as like the nature of both, is obscured, is hidden, is kept from us sort of by differences between social structures and subjective desire, between social coding and desires deterritorializing repressive mechanisms in society. These things sort of play in their own different ways. Ivan says, subjective physical constraints, i.e. material constraints, complexify into subjectivity over time because the intrinsic contradiction... You are like 4 or 5 paragraphs ahead of me, my friend. So I'm not going to say yes yet. But, I mean, that's not a terrible way to put it. So, but I'm not going to say yes yet, because that's not what's actually in this paragraph. Not going to say yes yet, Ivan. It's not technically not what's in this paragraph yet. We're getting there. But that's kind of the setup. Again, we're talking about looking at the regimes and using them to sort of figure out desiring production. And there's this bit here. And yet the difference in regime, far from being accentuated and deepened, is on the contrary reduced to a minimum, because desiring production as an absolute limit remains an exterior limit, or else stays unoccupied as an internalized or displaced limit, with the result that the machines of desire operate on this side of their limit within the framework of the socius and its codes. When people ask, what do they mean by limit? They're starting to lay out a lot of this kind of at once. But that's kind of, so first off, notice that. They're saying here that despite these differences in regime, the reality is these are more minimized. Despite what seems to be these differences in regime, because remember, they're not really differences. What seems like this counterintuitive sort of inverse sort of relation between them, the differences are minimized because desiring production operates either as external boundary or internalized but displaced one. As such, desire is able to function within social frameworks because the desiring production operates as an external boundary. Still having that, by having that and that separation, desire functions within the social framework pretty well, despite it sounding like it's like the opposite. So desire is able to be invested almost completely through the entire thing. And that's kind of what they're driving at. When we talk about, for example, let's go back to the primitive, the earth socius. And you spend your time early on in your life, kids tend to be a little bit more open. They're doing a lot of different stuff, but at some age, early, it's not necessarily puberty. It's much earlier in some tribes. They do horrifying things, torturous things, aside from just tattoos or scarification or pain rituals or whatever it may be. They do kind of wild shit that carves so fucking deep into you that it becomes almost a natural channel for desire. They're rewriting your desire pathways through pain, more or less. And that incredible repression that's happening there, that thing, it doesn't mean that desire is not part of it. It is. And those things that are carved into you, you're still social. Desire's actually almost operating right up next to the social, or within the social at that point, despite it seeming like this is the opposite. They're actually more close than ever. Okay? Because how social and how the two regimes interact is different than just saying, well, it's two versions of things, because it's not. Remember, they're the same thing. It's just an order of magnitude. And so that's why they have the line here. That is why the primitive codes and even the despotic overcodings testify to a polyvocity that functionally draws them nearer to a chain of decoding of desire. The parts of the desiring machine function in the very workings of the social machines. The flux of desire enter and exit through the codes that continue to inform the model and experience of death that are elaborated in a unity of the socio-desiring apparatus, the system overall. It's not a question for these tribes about the death instinct to this idea, to the extent that like the model and experience are better coded in a circuit that never stops grafting desiring machines onto social machines, which is their next little bit here, right? Because the polyvocity that seems to function, and it seems to work, this is in primitive tribes, there is a polyvocity. It's the nature of the graphism or the vocality of things. There is a weird way that meaning constantly is ever shifting based on deaths and social and everything else. Primitive tribal languages don't work the same. You can go study. They don't work the same as English for a lot of reasons, like especially American English or others of today. There's a lot more contingency. There's a lot more context that goes into them that makes it very difficult to sort of one-to-one them up against each other. Well, it's because of how these things function, how these things work. The way desiring machines work within social machines matters here. And it matters here kind of a huge amount. It matters here a huge amount. It's even less of a question of the death instinct to the extent the model and the experience are better coded to a circuit that never stops grafting the desiring machines onto the social machine and implanting social machines in desiring machines. The death instinct shifts how it works, how it operates. This is not the same thing. Remember when Freud came up with the death instinct during World War I, as part of his looking into World War I and the horrors of it, which is the first capitalist war. And they have a reason for saying that, if you want to go read all of those fun things. That setup that's happening there, ultimately, what ends up happening is like the death instinct is almost like receding into this explanatory concept when the model and experience are well coded in the circuit connecting desiring and social machines. They go to say, death comes all the more from without as it is coded from within. This is especially true of a system of cruelty, where death is part of a primitive surplus value and finite death structures.
So, hi Brooks.
Yeah.
Could you say that the death instinct becomes part of the an axiomatic in capitalism?
They're playing with instinct in a very particular phrasing here, so it doesn't really become part of it. The instinct is, if we call instinct in general, the conditions of life historically and socially determined by the relations of production and anti-production in a system. So what they're adding to this, because again, this is slightly different than the way that the axiomatic functions. In capital itself, we have now the death instinct. And the death instinct is, instinct specifically is this historically and socially determined relations of production and anti-production within a system. Within capital, that happens in capital innately. This is not the same as the death that comes from without, or the polyvocity of death that is sort of allowed within the primitive or even in the despotic. This shifts. This changes things. It plays in a very different place. And that's, I mean, the next paragraph is one that says this, but more or less, I would say yes, with a asterisk. Should we name the stream? All right, that's fair.
But you also said that death was used as by the despotic, right? As part of its regime of control and so forth, and authority. So before the idea of this notion of a death instinct, did you say that death was also part of these despotic socius?
Death is a part of all of them. Death is within all of these things. That's kind of their point. The phrasing that they've got and how it works is about how the death instinct shifts and plays. And they're really trying to, again, they're just shoving a lot in here. There's just a fuck ton happening inside of this. So I don't have a great, perfect response to that because it's a fair question. It's a fair question. I don't have a great answer to that one.
But you're talking about the distinction between the idea of death under despotic and the death as a kind of a natural, primitive experience, right? And is that the main distinction? Death under a regime of the despotic and death under
it's how the model of death plays in all of those systems. So to read a little bit of Holland, this is the role of Deleuze and Guattari's version of the death instinct, to bring productive desire to a halt, suspend or freeze connections it has made, in order that new and different connections may be possible. They therefore prefer the term anti-production to death instinct, and they go on to work through chapter 3 and 4 how anti-production comes to appear as instinct and is misunderstood as such by psychoanalysis. So this is the thing that is happening for Freud. The death instinct, or anti-production as they refer to it, is the maintenance of a model, the destruction of connections in order to enable new connections. But there is a maintenance of a model, oscillation back and forth. That's why they're quoting Klosowski in the vicious circle here. Again, this is how I understand it. So when we start talking about the shift in capital, you look back at old regimes and how they maintain these things are various different ways anti-production sort of plays into them, but it's not baked in the same exact way. The death instinct and how it functions in capital is very particular. And when Freud, just like with libido, when Freud sort of makes discovery, I put in quotes, of the death instinct, what he's noticing to them is the way that death has become infused within experience, kind of across the board. The market-based form of the death instinct is very, very, very different because of this. And that's the last little bit that I'm just going to read a little bit more from Holland. Because it's the way that social production operates. What is more, the death instinct, which first arose under despotism, becomes even more pervasive under capitalism. Instead of hovering over everyone as a distant threat from the despot, because in the primitive, death was just sort of part of life and the sort of continuous of things. The despot actually was able to deal death, and death could come from above anywhere. And instead of being afar, death now becomes imminent to everyday existence, which harmers this omnipresent threat of having insufficient money to secure food or shelter. This omnipresent threat of losing one's job, losing market access to the means of life. This market-based form of the death instinct, like other elements of capitalist asceticism, is reflected and reinforced by the dynamics of nuclear family, with parental love functioning as money, since children are effectively isolated from other sources of such nourishment and protection. If they forfeit parental love, if they break the laws of the father, they lose access to the mother, they perish. Under both sets of conditions, the death instinct compels desire to become increasingly pacified, reactive, desirous of another's desire, but now the boss, the fathers, rather than the despots. The interaction of the death instinct and how it plays and how it becomes part of sort of every moment for us under capital, which then makes every sort of other relation under the symbolic order and under symbolic sort of structures that much more important, because we need to maintain access to life. We fear death. We fear such things because the death instinct, that worry of it, is consistent, more or less. JK?
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. That's exactly the kind of distinction that I was asking about. Yeah.
Okay, good. It's this is hard shit. This is like, as I've said multiple times, this is easily the parts of the book I'm the weakest at, because you start getting into, to me, this is where you start talking about like praxis, the practice of life, how this can impede us, how this can set us up, how to sort of attach it to things that you know, like that I experience, that you experience, that we all kind of go through. And that's kind of the beast of the thing here. And that's, this massive paragraph is going over the change, because as well, we may see, and we can talk about the way that desiring production is this connective, disconnected, free form, whatever. It's not really that, but it's this connective, disconnective sort of construction of things that happens and then produces and has a social order with it. When we talk about the system of cruelty and the earth socius, it seems like this is so counter to what desire would do that it's like, oh my God, anathema. But it's actually, they're most similar. Despite that, this despotic, maybe less dissimilar, but like there's a little bit of a setup. But within capital, and you'll hear people talk about this and make this mistake quite a bit, but it seems like capital is more in line. It's decoding. It's doing all the same stuff desire's doing. And it's like, yeah, but that's like where things are completely fucked up, because the two are inverse. I don't want to say mirrors of each other, but it's going to be close to that. It's almost a negative image of the other. And so as one seems like it's furthest away, it's actually closest. As one seems like it's closest, it's actually going to be furthest away. Very important as we get to the next paragraph here, because the next paragraph is about capitalism. So they're actually finally making that sort of moment.
Yeah, it sounds like he's agreeing with Freud's notion. The capitalism is really just a continuation or extension of the original patriarchy, the paternal, threat of castration is a kind of a death, right? That death drive or death experience. And that kind of threat of death, under capitalism is just, you have to, join the system in order to survive. Otherwise, you're not gonna have any, resources to survive, which is a threat of death.
I do think they agree, but there's the asterisk I would put with it is the same as I kind of put a lot, which is it's not like when we say agree is a very loaded term often for people. So I do think they agree, but what I think they're also saying is that it's a bit like when Strauss looked back and went, well, there is no incest amongst these tribes. They agree with that, but but again, why? Well, for Strauss, it was because obviously the prohibition against incest was always there. And they're like, no, you noticed, and you're right, generally, that incest didn't happen as we define it today. But there's a negative space that exists there that Strauss called something affirmatively that necessarily since people didn't do incest, there must be a prohibition. That negative space is filled by prohibition, repulsion, when instead, actually, it's not so much that it's filled with anything, it's that it simply is only known to us from this position, that there was no such thing as incest at the time. So when Freud is noticing the death instinct, and he's like, holy shit, the death is everywhere, they're like, yes, however, there's more to it than that. It isn't just simply that the death instinct is this drive towards death. It's instead that death is so effused, built into everything that's happening. And specifically death, as in like the dying, the actual dying, not just the dying of every single moment. And we'll get to that in this very next paragraph. But it's how these things sort of work, and how these things interplay that sort of builds what these things are. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but doesn't Deleuze and Guattari also paint this picture of a historical, development of humankind as a kind of beginning with this despotic, right? Isn't the despotic this kind of a patriarchy, the incest? But is Deleuze and Guattari saying that that's not really, the despotic was not there, or?
No, it was very much. It's again, it's not that they're saying that it wasn't there. They're taking just a different edge with it. And so I'm agreeing with your statement. I'm just adding a bit. I don't know if that, I didn't mean to disagree, like say that was wrong. It is an accurate statement, but there is an edge where they're like, he just didn't identify it fully. Like, it's the Deleuze thing. They didn't go far enough. Lacan figured it out. He just didn't do Lacan enough. Freud saw this. He just didn't do it enough, because in all of this, what they're talking about is the coding of death and where death is inscribed, or how it appears. The system of cruelty, they say, where death is inscribed in the primitive mechanism of surplus value, as well as the movement of finite blocks of death. Death is sort of built into the sort of systems itself. But in the despotic terror, where death becomes infinite, death experiences an elevation that tends to make of it a latent instinct, where it subsists in overcoding law and experience for overcoded subjects at the same time as anti-production remains separate as the share owing to the overlord. This is, again, these are the pieces. It's not really the same death instinct is what they're saying. Just like with Lacan, they're like, they don't say there's no such thing as a master signifier. Like, they would add, not anymore. That under the despot, who was basically playing that role, the master signification, the way the language worked pre-capital, is spot on what Lacan was talking about. But we're not there anymore. Instead, we're breaking these things down. And they saw that, I think, fairly ahead of the curve, in my opinion. But that's kind of their take. And that's why they keep talking about these objectities, these large objectities that they're talking about, because it's specific. The large objectities, the large objective movement of desire, the large objective elements of society, the earth and the despot, the territorial body and the despotic body. The primitive societies see earth as a gigantic system that they are but a piece of, that the earth itself is what determined and recorded social relations. As I say, literally recording the history of a people. We here today, this was my grandfather's land. But for primitive people who lived a place for like 1,000 years, or more, they literally could see how the land was built and dealt with the people who lived inside of it. And the land also in turn determined them. Rice paddies and fields are huge in areas where that grew, and in that type of climate, you needed very particular everything to do that, versus wandering sort of nomadic tribes people, or cities of semi-nomadic people in the Americas, or cities of people. But again, determined by the land. The earth gave this back, and that was part of not just their ritual, but sort of their existence. The territory they were in was determined by and determined them. It's like back and forth, the sort of odd, primitive, communist, whatever existence. But this organization of life is how the large objectivities work there. For the despotic body, this is the barbarian hordes or the imperial societies. Either way, this works, but it's the despot or sovereign. It's the sovereign as a position, and they are the central point of everything that everyone looks to. Everything is mediated through what that person would want. This is why kingdoms have eras and families, and people say they did things by what King George would have wanted, or they think of it like that because that is the existence they had during those times. They lived under that. The central figure overcodes territorial inscriptions necessarily, and desires flowing through these things. These are channeling, coding, or overcoding desire completely. They are the framework of all social representation. All of it comes through the earth, or specifically the despot. And that legitimacy that social arrangements have comes from them. The reason that tribes existed as they did, that they would even tell themselves and talk about, is because that's the way the earth or the land or the gods in their own unique sort of animus way, versus the despot, where they go, oh, it's because the king allows this, or the king says this, or that thing. They're playing with things. Again, objectivity is like a really fucking weird term that I do not encounter a lot. I would wonder if it's a thing that they actually, like, comes from very specific circles. But that's what they're driving at. It's this idea of entity, object mixed together. And it's the material symbolic mix that is the organizing framework of large-scale social systems. That's why they use objectivity, objective entity, object entity. It's a play on that, but it's the thing that organizes material and symbolic frameworks inside of things.
So you're saying that the despotic these entities are distinct from the Freudian notion of a patriarchy, right?
I do believe it's distinct. I believe those things are
okay.
I believe it is distinct because we're talking, it's distinct in the sense that, like, they wouldn't have had a concept or ability to talk about patriarchy prior to capital. It is necessarily something that is about the decoding and destruction and shifting of desire that enables us to have that type of analysis. The same with labor, the same with libido, the same with other things. But, like, because again, they had queens with like these, the sovereign was a position. It wasn't really necessarily anything like that. I wouldn't say. To me, I wouldn't say, but maybe I'm wrong. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong on that. This is a complicated thing.
Right, because what you're saying is that this despotic for D&G is not derived from a familial relationship of a patriarchy in the family with the Oedipal complex, and so that's what they're disagreeing with, the whole idea of the Freudian Oedipal complex, right? That's Freud and Lacan's understanding of what
I think so.
What social regimes are.
I think so. I think so. Yeah, I think so.
I'm not quite sure how to help you with that.
Alexa,
Okay.
stop. God damn it. Alexa, you definitely can't help me with that. What the fuck? Sorry, Alexa tried to help you, JK. I don't know why. Yeah, I think that's a fair way to put it. I mean, we're going to be going into capital in just a second, so let's maybe put a pin in it and we'll rediscuss after that. Let's go through some questions now. I'm not going to reread Ivan's because Ivan is in a couple paragraphs from us. JK, you already asked this one, but I just want to say, are the objectivities? Wait, do you mean objectivities or objectivities? I hate when they use words like this.
Yeah, whatever word you use, that's from the book there. I was trying to.
It's the objectivity.
Objectivities. Okay.
Objectivity. It's we've looked this up before, and I'm pretty sure like they literally made it up here. Thank you, Values Last Tango, very much. But Values Less Tango gave me a very lovely compliment, and I thank them for it. I've enjoyed the streams for a long time. Always good to hear you talking sense. Thank you very much. I'm trying to make sense. I don't know if I'm talking sense, but I'm trying to make sense. Objectivity is a really weird term. Yeah. God. And Tracy says, yeah, they say they do use it in French, and I think it has the same weirdness in French. We went through this where it's like objectité is like in French too, it's like it's almost like it's a neologism. Like they kind of fucked with language to make a thing. I hate saying that because it also sounds like a word that would pre-exist them, but I don't know. Feel free, anyone, to tell me otherwise. It's a neologism that D&G made up that is about large-scale social, material, symbolic reality that channels and codes flux of desire as a thing and is like a framework for social representation at large. Because they only use it in reference to that. The only way they use it is in reference to that very specific thing. But again, objective element, sort of. Objective entity. Objective object entity. I don't care. I don't care anymore. I'm going to stop rabbit holing on that. Jesus Christ. What a word. What a fucking word. All right. Where were we? Two seconds. All right. Oh, this is going to be a long one. Because this is capital and this is complex. This is very complex. I don't really have a way around this. This one is going to be a lot of me stumbling over myself. Probably not the sense that D&G intended. What do you have? Objective. The quality of the objective. Yeah, it's not that. Like that's the... Yeah, that's Heidegger's way. Oh, maybe are they using it in the Heideggerian way? No. Are they fucking with Heidegger? They do that. That's an interesting question. We're going to have to find out at some point. I like finding new weird things to discover. This book is filled with them. All right. Let's make it through. Any other questions on this before we move into capital? Because this is not capital yet. Remember, we are at this point still only talking about the first two socii that they've discussed, the earth and the despot, how these things function. And the martial esotericist, no. Capital is not a BWO, or not like the BWO. And we don't want to draw analogies that way. It's very bad. Dangerous. This next paragraph is going to be a lot. Fuck me. I'm open for questions. If anyone's got any, I'll give it a second to just be awkward here. Give it a second. Just be awkward. Bob just tagged me in an image that I am in love with, and oh my Lord. I am fascinated by things. I made a comment the other day. I don't know if everyone saw it. I do enough streams, but I was saying that one of the challenges we have, and because a lot of people don't realize how people use the internet, but in the early days of the internet, when search engines became a thing or forums became a thing, you actually see younger people using these systems to learn about themselves in the same way they would if they were going out into the world. If you have friends or family or a large social organization, and you will test and find out how they feel about homosexuality, or how they feel about your sexuality. Are you a man or a woman? How do you find the things that are uncomfortable? Well, at first it was on the internet. News groups were filled with it, forums and things like that, but news groups. And then it became like chat rooms were a place that people did that. And then search engines. And then like, it's not a joke. Go to Yahoo Answers. Like anytime one of these things pops up, you see the same shit. It's kids trying to figure out what the fuck they're doing and how they feel about things and how they feel about themselves. And I am not sure how this exists, but I made a comment that people are trying to discover themselves right now. There are kids trying to figure out if they're man, woman, NB, gay, straight, bi, by talking to AI. And of course, Bob, who can't help but search the worst parts of the internet, posts a person, I can't stop arguing with AI about not being gay. If this is not parody, it is kind of amazing and a little sad. If it is parody, it's brilliant. I'll 1 second. I'll post it in. If you guys can't see the image, I'll post it in chat here in Discord too. So get that chat open. You can read too. I know that sounds ridiculous, but I seriously spend at least an hour a day arguing with AI about my sexuality. This is a Reddit post. I'm not entirely sure why it's so addicting. Maybe because it's easier to argue with an AI than it is real people. Unfortunately, no matter the points I make, the AI will tell me I'm gay to some degree. I know none of it's real. That it's just spitting out algorithmic-based predictions of what to say, but it still upsets me. It upsets me, but I can't stop. I'd really just like to stop it. It's a major waste of time. I can't tell anyone in real life about this, so I guess I'd like to hear someone else's take on it. This is wild. Thank you for this, Babo. Thank you for this, Babo. If it's real, which I buy it. If it's not real, I, for some reason, do believe that this is a thing that's happening. There's the way that data works, the way that algorithms work. I wouldn't trust it to know either way personally. And it horrifies me. But that is, this is the world we're living in. When we speak about capital and the death instinct, it's the world we're living in. Just wild. It might be AI, ironically. It might be a lot of things, but it is, it's something. Wild.
So Brooks, do you use AI or ChatGPT to ask some of these questions?
No, I use it when I'm asking for sources or to search the internet, because it does a very good job of that for me, because I can't be fucked to use Google to search through like 1,000 things. So Claude is what I tend to use. OpenAI has it too, but you can go search the web for this, this, and this, and find me examples of this, this, and this, and it'll do it for you over and over until you find things with sources, and it's kind of nice. So it's good for finding like other books. So like, if you have a paragraph that you're having trouble with, I don't recommend you just put it into ChatGPT. But when I say just put it into ChatGPT, that's part of it. If I put it into Claude, like I'm having trouble with this paragraph, what's good is to go, hey, this is a part from Deleuze and Guattari's Anti-Oedipus I'm having issues with. Please refer to me any other texts where this paragraph or anything inside of it is referenced. It's kind of a cheating way to sort of get your own bibliography because, again, all of those books are in it. Not directly, but they have some level of that. So it will then do searches. It has some level of guess in terms of like how it's sourced. It has to do with probabilities, a whole bunch of other shit. AI is fucking weird, but it will give you like your own bibliography for a lot of stuff. I found that very helpful. Very helpful. But I like every couple weeks on my Saturday streams, I will sit and I will ask it, what is a body without organs? And then we can talk about it. It's never good. It's never good. How does Google Scholar not fulfill the same function? Because I can tell you, and it's a really interesting distinction. So Google Scholar will search with there's no semantics in there. It searches for the words you're looking for exactly. But let's say I put the entire paragraph in because I don't know what someone cited or what someone's talking about. If I put it in Google Scholar, it will return 0 fucking results except for like literally the book or someone who's literally copying the book. But if I put the whole thing into Claude and I say, find me sources that refer to this, use direct, like you can give it stuff, it will find you books that actually reference sentences within the paragraph. And so, because you're generally speaking, with a paragraph that say, I don't know, this fucking long, no one on earth is citing the entire paragraph. And if they are, and let's say that there is by miracle some book out there that actually takes only that paragraph and breaks down every line, the paragraph is not in order in terms of how semantic search works with Google Scholar. So it won't work. It sucks. But with the AI will automatically, because of how it functions, break all of it up and then find you 5 or 6 different books that reference various parts of it. So it's a small difference, but I found it be really useful. It's how I found some really fantastic papers the last year. Second thing that it does also is English isn't required. And it's a weirder thing and harder to do, but you can actually have it also you can say, translate this into 3 other French, German, and what else did I do? Spanish, and find references, and it will do it. And that, you want to talk about something that's fucking invaluable, as far as I'm concerned, like having actual like searches in French, German, and others, and then it gets sent back, and then you just put that in a fucking, hey, translate this for me. And it's like, holy shit, you can find some crazy, interesting, good explanations for things. It's basically cheating, but it's like a cool kind of cheating. Yeah, like just don't ever trust it. Like it doesn't know anything. You're smarter than an AI, no matter who you are. Does that make sense? JK? Sorry for the ramble.
Oh yeah, that does make sense. Yeah, I found it very useful for answers, some questions and so forth.
Yeah, and again, I will continually say over and over and over that AI is both not nearly as good and also better for things than people think. We have a really fucked up ability as, I don't know, modern subjects of the world to have no concept of how anything actually works. And so everyone thinks it's like the greatest thing ever or the worst. And it's like, no, dude, it's just a hammer. It's just a hammer. It does a thing. And if you can figure out how to use that tool, happy day. But it's not going to replace a whole bunch of other stuff. It's not really that cool. It's like, because it is I still believe that the companies are evil, but that's a different beast. I will continually yell and scream about how we should just basically globally nationalize all AI systems into one gigantic one that people can freely use and add just an excessive amount of nuclear or solar power for it. I think that would jumpstart, a lot of humanity. instead of having it, weird paywalled knowledge and this other shit behind tons of money. It's fucking stupid. Yeah, AI tankyism. I'll take that. I'm an AI tanky. Because that's the worst part. And I have this argument with people regularly. AI, it's not about AI at the end of the day because there's two steps to it. People think, oh, the AI companies are using people's work and then selling access to that work to make money, and therefore they're stealing from labor. And it's like, that's actually not the point that actually labor is being stolen from. It seems like it because that's where the product is and that's what we're used to. But the reality is the model couldn't exist without everyone's labor that had already existed. If it didn't have stuff to train on the internet freely, none of these companies would have models. And the money isn't made by these companies by selling it. As much as it seems like this sounds insane, it's made by investors. That's actually how people make money in AI. And it's the only way I foresee they will ever make money. It's like Uber. Once they get to the point where they're actually having to turn a profit, they'll end up consistently losing money or breaking even because it is going to be a race to the bottom. And that's the end of it. And because that's capitalism. So all the money is being made right now. Yeah, the pre-labor is being stolen. It's really a weird thing. To me, I think the idea of labor and the abstraction of it is probably best exemplified by AI. And it just shows how few people actually understand what labor actually is in Marxist theory. It's really a different thing. But yeah. What about using AI for semiotic realization as an extension to hold contradiction long enough to synthesize? Since there's information saturation nowadays, we're offloading to externalized structures, but those structures are subjective. I think if people are aware of what they're doing and you are able to stand outside of yourself and not be captured by the idea that the AI is intelligent, you can do a lot of things with it. The moment you start to think it's thinking, you're fucked. The moment you think it's thinking, you're fucked. But you can do a lot of stuff with it otherwise. I wouldn't use it for final product at all, but yeah. But we're not here about AI, Brooks, you say, loudly, screaming at me. I know. We're here for Anti-Oedipus. So let's get to anti-Oediping. Things are very different in capitalism, precisely because the flux of capital are decoded and deterritorialized fluxes. Precisely because the subjective essence of production is revealed in capitalism. Precisely because the limit becomes internal to capitalism, which continually reproduces it and also continually occupies it as an internalized and displaced limit. Precisely for these reasons, the identity in nature must appear for itself between social production and desiring production. But in its turn, this identity in nature, far from favoring an affinity in regime between the two modes of production, increases the difference in regime in a catastrophic fashion, and assembles an apparatus of repression, the mere idea of which neither savagery nor barbarianism could provide us. This is because, on the basis of a general collapse of the large objectities, the decoded and deterritorialized flux of capitalism are not recaptured or co-opted, but directly apprehended in a codeless axiomatic that consigns them to the universe of subjective representation. Now this universe has as its functions the splitting of the subjective essence, the identity in nature, between two functions, that of abstract labor, alienated in private property that reproduces the ever wider interior limits, and that of the abstract desire alienated in the privatized family that displaces the ever narrower internalized limits. The double alienation, labor and desire, is constantly increasing and deepening the difference in regime at the heart of the identity in nature. At the same time that death is decoded, it loses its relationship with a model and an experience, becomes an instinct. That is, it effuses in the immanent system where each act of production is inextricably linked to the process of anti-production as capital. There, where the codes are undone, the death instinct lays hold of the repressive apparatus, begins to direct the circulation of the libido, a mortuary axiomatic. One might then believe in liberated desires, but ones that, like cadavers, feed on images. Death is not desired, but what is desired is dead, already dead. Images. Everything labors in death. Everything wishes for death. In truth, capitalism has nothing to co-opt. Rather, its powers of co-option coexist more often than not with what is to be co-opted and even anticipate it. How many revolutionary groups as such are already in place for a co-option that will be carried out only in the future, form an apparatus for the absorption of surplus value not even produced yet, which gives them precisely an apparent revolutionary position. In a world such as this, there is no living desire that could not, of itself, cause the system to explode, or that would not make the system dissolve at one end, where everything would end up following behind and being swallowed up. A question of regime. Is my cat going nuts? Not anymore. There's a lot in this. So, things are obviously very different in capitalism. By the way, death also means something different in capitalism. All these things work differently in capitalism. It's kind of been the push. Because like death being infused or effused throughout the system, it's not really death, but it's death. That's going to be the fun part of this. So I don't know how else to say, but except to dive in. Oh, God. It's a lot. This is going to be a lot. All right. This first, second sentence is so fucking long. We're going to break it into a few bits. So when we talk about the limits or the setup or how the two regimes operate or the way that these things work, remember before we were talking about how there's this inverse correlation where it seems like they're far apart, but they're actually closer than ever. When they seem closer than ever, they're actually further apart. Keep that in the back of your head as like a tone for this next bit. Precisely because the flux of capital are decoded and deterritorialized flux. Under capitalism, capital is, because the flux of capital are decoded and deterritorialized flux, the previously determined codes of desire and overcoding of desire, what you do for a living, what your position is in society, what everything is, man, woman, gay, straight, sexuality, labor, laziness, fucking anything, all of it decoded. It's not part of that traditional constraint or code system anymore, right? Precisely because the subjective essence of production is revealed in capitalism. The subjective essence of production is revealed in capitalism. Capitalism reveals a great deal. We learn about the BWO. We learn about libido. We learn about labor. We learn about all of these things. The essences of production revealed in capitalism, precisely because the limit becomes internal to capitalism, which continually reproduces it. Also continually occupies it in an internalized and displaced limit, because that's not a fucking run-on sentence. But the limit that they were talking about before has now moved internal to capitalism. It's internal to capitalism. And again, this internalized and displaced, The limit becomes internal to capitalism, which continually reproduces it, also continually occupies it as an internalized and displaced limit. We'll come back to it. Roger, do you have a simpler way of putting that? Is Roger here? Roger's just in text. That motherfucker shows up and he just types in here. You're a son of a bitch. You're a son of a bitch, Roger.
Chris, when it uses the word limit, what does it mean by limit? The limit of what?
It literally means limit. Like the edge of things, the limit as far as it goes, where one breaks from the other, the limit of desiring production, the limit of capital. He means the edges of things. And that's like, it doesn't go further, the limit, let's find out where else do they use that?
Even death, is death the limit then?
No, death is internal. Go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, because if you think of death, right, we think of death as a limit, right?
Mm-hmm.
A limit of life. So are they saying that the something like, instead of saying death, it's saying their thing, they're saying limit is
limit is like the edge of the potentiality. So when we talk about the limit of things, we tend to talk about the edges of stuff, right? So like, how to put it? Let me see if I can figure it. Let me see if there's a better explanation somewhere, because that's actually a really, the way they use this, I've sort of kept internal and not really actually spent the time to sort of define what they mean by limit exactly. It's bounding, a limit, an edge, I know, but the phrasing they're using is, so then I will ask, because it's specifically, let's talk about this wording that they have here, which is, the limit becomes internal to capitalism, which continually reproduces it, the limit, also continually occupies it, the limit, as an internalized and displaced limit. So within capital, the limit of desiring production, limit of potentiality, things like that, the limit, the edges of possibility, the bounds of such a thing. Within the territorial socius, the limit, because desire and social are very much inextricably sort of direct, the limit would be the territory. That's very much sort of that. The limit is the thing. With the despotic, the limit is shifted. And because all comes from on high and everything is there, there's a very different type of limit to social production and production in general. With capitalism, the bounds move internally to us as subjects, because the subjective essence of production is revealed in capitalism. Because of that, all of these things are different. It shifts what a limit is, where it is, and how it works. The limit becomes internal to capitalism, no longer external. The despot has the edges of his reign, his ruling. It's not the world, even though he is a godhead of sorts. He has limits. There's limits to him, and he's within those limits. But capital doesn't do that. Capital instead has the limit become internal to it and reproduces it and occupies it as an internalized and displaced limit, the self-imposed structure and symbolic repression. This is me spitballing as I'm reading through this and talking through this, so feel free to just disregard literally every word I've said. But that is kind of how I'm reading that. So the limit moves from external to internal to capitalism, and capitalism's happy to continually make this limit and remake and unmake the way that capitalism's able to expand beyond its limit, but then capture that limit again, expand and contract, to have every bit of desire become axiomatized, controlled, and set up, despite the edges and the fringes constantly going beyond it and exiting it. Capital will happily take on and move the limit to those things. Whereas once the internet was ostensibly seen, because it was doing in some capacity stuff outside of what capital could handle. Capital didn't have money in the internet. It didn't set those things up. We didn't really understand it in terms of capital, because it wasn't It was ostensibly for money making, but no one really knew how. But at some point, capital was able to fully capture, figure it out, and take all of the meaning of that. And now, when we talk about the internet, we don't talk about the internet as a place of total potential possibilities, because it's not to us anymore. It's within the limit. It's capital has recaptured it. And this is why it's this internalized and displaced limit. And for this is what they're saying. For these reasons, the identity in nature must appear for itself between social production and desiring production. And that last line, the identity seems to land between social and desiring production, and that identity becomes explicit effectively. And then they say, but in its turn, this identity in nature, because that's, again, the first bit they're talking about there. Now this identity in nature, far from favoring an affinity in regime between the two modes of production, desiring production and social production, increases the difference in regime in a catastrophic fashion, assembling an apparatus of repression, the mere idea of which savagery or barbarism could not even provide. It's not that this identity between the two provides a harmony. That, again, they seem like they're doing a lot, but it's actually further and further and further. It's the difference has been exploded. And because the limit is internal to capital, and by internal, it's internal to the system, and it's constantly ever displacing it, moving it, recapturing it, moving and recapturing it, deterritorialization, reterritorialization happening all the time. This is what they're sort of talking about, because it's this difference in regime and the setup that basically allows a repressive apparatus, the kind of which that despotism could only fucking dream of. And this is where that line, the word, comes in. This is because, on the basis of a general collapse of the large objectities, the decoded and deterritorialized flux of capitalism are not recaptured or co-opted, but directly apprehended in a codeless axiomatic that consigns them to the universe of subjective representation. So again, capitalism doesn't code. They went through this, chapter 3, you can go listen to the recordings. It's the capitalist socialists, and they're running through this. Desire is freed. And there is kind of an amazing thing that happens there. It is liberatory in a sense. I'm not, doomed to doing whatever my father did by name, or what my race does, or any of, race can change its meaning. For God's sake, whiteness is what the fuck is that? That's not it can mean anything. I've met Asian people who claim it. It's wild when you start talking about what these things mean, because they're not coded. These traditional codes, the freeing of desire, is a thing. And the collapse of those large objectities, the object entities of the despot or the earth, they've collapsed, they've shifted. Capital is now the center of it. The decoded and deterritorialized flux of capitalism are not recaptured or co-opted. This is not what's happening. Instead, they're apprehended directly in a codeless axiomatic, consigning them to the universe of subjective representation. Man, I feel like I have to go into such an explanation here, but this is the big deal of how capitalism does this. It's directly apprehended. It's not captured as encoded or territorialized or anything like that, but instead this codeless axiomatic comes along, consigning the flux of desire to subjective representation. Now, this universe has as its functions the splitting of the subjective essence, the identity in nature, into two functions. That of abstract labor, alienated in private property that reproduces the ever wider interior limits. This is why I kept reading, because the word limits comes up again. Ever wider interior limits, and abstract desire, alienated in a privatized family that displaced the ever narrower internalized limits. So I'm going to read internalized limits as that of the subject. That's what I'm going to read it as. And that the abstract labor alienated reproduces ever wider interior limits, interior limits of capital, the interior limit, what is capable of a people, a person, sort of a society, interior limits, but internalized, I'm going to say, is probably subjective. That's the subjects. Is that, anyone disagree where those two might sit? That's how I'm reading it, with the word limits.
So you say that this subjective representation is defined as in terms of privatized family, right? In one sense, and also as alienated and private property. So that's why he calls it subjective representation. Like individuals who are these two spheres, right?
Yeah. So we have abstract labor, which is abstract labor, the efforts of creation and work materially in private property that reproduces ever wider interior limits. And that of abstract desire, alienated and privatized family. It's the wording in here is so fucking so different.
Because when he uses the term subjective representation, it sounds like they have a very is that like a liberal kind of definition of in a capitalist society where they feel like they're subjective beings, some sense of freedom
Well,
to do
so
what,
it's
yeah.
well, this is because we've got to be talking about. To me, we're talking about a given subjectivity that exists inside of this. Instead of the objectivity, it's almost a subjectivity, because when a person exists in capital, we have on the one side, and this is again how I'm reading it, the two functions. So we have abstract labor, alienated and private property, reproducing an ever wider interior limit. The ability for labor to do things and what it's able to get us, this ever wider interior limit, but it's very particularized. It's an abstraction of that labor. And then we also have sort of this other thing where the person who is being raised in a family, as we all are, but by being raised in a family, what we find is that there is, through this fucked up subjective essence, there is the limit we're talking about, as I see it, is that of imagination, what you can conceptualize, that of which you can consider. So the abstract desire he's talking about here is that of which you can sort of consider outside of it. That's ish. Because we're talking about the limits of capitalist production. And the limits of production come in the two forms. There's that which I can build and do, and why I build and do, and what I get for that, like that kind of process. And there's only so much, and it's very particularly laid out in a market format. On the other hand, there's also what I'm able to even consider doing. And the things I would consider doing necessarily are limited by the privatized family, which is that internalized limit of what is possible, what is my potestas versus potentias. Actually, it may be even more related to that at all. It's but potestas for Spinoza, potestas was sort of your I don't want to say limits of your ability, because it's kind of a weird way to put it. It's an old Latin phrase, but it kind of meant power. And potentius and potestas have power as their English translation, but it's how we use them differently. When I say, I feel, oh God, I'm coursing with power, that's potentius. If you were to say, I don't know if I have the power to do that, that's potestas. These are not the same thing. We use the same word for them because English is nothing if not weirdly poetic and problematic in a lot of ways. But these are about the limits of all of these things. And so when you're talking about how capitalism works, and they're talking about the continually displaced apparent limits that sort of exist, these internal limits, this seems to be, I'm leaning towards whatever I just sort of said. That's kind of a mess, to be frank. But yeah. Fuck.
So would you say that the subject in this capitalist society is, is captured within these axiomatics of, and their limits are determined by these axiomatic of the capitalist society, right?
Yeah, and they're going to be building on all of this, and there's a reason I'm kind of rabbit holing on this specific term, and I think it's fair to, because as we get going and we start talking about what the difference is between subject groups or subjugated groups, and a person's position, the way that people sort of exist and play inside of it is about how they deal with limits and how they're invested in these things, and it's going to be continually brought back up as we get going, and so it's to just read a little bit of Holland, which I know you're all shocked by. Molar investments do not express merely statistical regularities or aggregates. Herd instinct or forms of social gregarity exert strong selective pressure on molecularity to limit its multiplicity and shape its prevailing forms of sovereignty. Molecular desire is what is given culture as a selective process of marking or inscription, which invents the large numbers in whose favor it is exerted. These are the limits, I think, that they're referring to, more or less. Because the limitations of things, to just, again, read some more, because now he's talking about Marx and Deleuze here in production. Reterritorialization thus actualizes the power component of capitalism, the retrograde force that hinders development of new productive forces, and more importantly, prevents the expenditure of surplus for purposes other than reinvestment in further surplus production. Deterritorialization, as the economic component, represents the constant revolutionizing of the means of production that generates change and frees energies of production and consumption from their existing objects and limitations. And that's the phrasing that they use when talking about it. It's a phrasing that they refer to the existing objects and limits. And having it be internalized instead of externalized means that we don't have a social order that has a literal limit, like the earth, for example, the territory, or the despot, where the limit is the despot's actual limits of power versus other despots, and it's kind of God's fighting. I would lean that Josh we can totally hear everything you're doing. Mute up.
Sorry about that.
No, you're good. So the limits are internal instead. Versus those are externalized. So we make the move where they come internalized. It moves it occupies it as an internalized and displaced limit. And that phrasing is, I think, really particular. So we have that thing now. We have the essence, the two functions. Abstract labor alienated in private property reproduces ever wider interior limits. That of abstract desire alienated by the privatized family that displaces the ever narrower internalized limits. These are social and desiring production that, again, seem like they're doing the same thing, but it's different setup. Labor is kind of like, labor is that thing in social production that they're talking about here, abstracted labor. It's alienated in private property, and that, as such, reproduces ever wider interior limits, the continual expansion and growth of capital, a marketplace, whatever it may be. And then also we have abstract desire alienated in privatized family displaces ever narrower internalized limits. So while capitalism's expanding, we're actually finding the subjectivity, and the room that's able to take. It's constantly being displaced as narrower, ever narrower, constantly narrowing. And that's basically what they're saying here, is that the direction that labor is enabling versus the internal sort of reality of the imagination, you could say, or internalized abstract desire is being shrunk. The double alienation, labor desire, is constantly increasing and deepening the difference in regime at the heart of identity in nature. This is the separation of the two. The labor and desire and their interaction, and one shrinking as the other's becoming larger and larger, or the capacity is being larger and larger, deepens this regime difference, despite what would be seeing their natural identity, desire as to labor, the production of desire leading right into labor as such. And so as they go with that, so we have death now. They go at the same time that death is decoded, it loses its relationship with a model and an experience. It becomes the instinct. It effuses in the immanent system where each act of production is inextricably linked to the process of anti-production as capital. So death decoded. Death also becomes everything's decoded. We no longer have the death from on high. We no longer have the death as it was coded or set up or overcoded or whatever it is. Its relationship is gone with the model or the experience of it. Death changes. It is now an instinct. It's effused in this immanent system where each act of production is inextricably linked to the process of anti-production as capital. So it's because it's permeating. It's not so much that death is there now. Death is really now this link to anti-production, the way capital functions, the way capital modulates itself and presents the model consistently, the way that we have that sort of vibration back and forth. I'm going to say, yeah, I like that. So there, where codes are undone, the death instinct lays hold of the repressive apparatus, begins to direct the circulation of the libido. So we have this thing now, because codes are no longer a thing, because codes are undone, because we're beyond codes, you might say. The repressive apparatus, which is kind of this axiomatizing thing, it's death just grabs hold and directs ultimately how libidinal energy circulates. The model of death is now baked into every strand of desire. It's this mortuary axiomatic, death-oriented rule set. That's a death-oriented rule set. One might then believe in liberated desires, but ones that, like cadavers, feed on images. And this is the turn where it's like death and desire mixed up. It's not that it's so much that we desire death, it's that we desire the dead. We desire the stable. We desire the image. We desire the actualized, you might say, the things that have stopped dying. And images are that. It's not so much that you desire death directly. It's not that the death desire is a thing where you desire dying, but instead that desire is directed towards the sort of images of death.
Is that like the aesthetic ideal?
I think it plays towards it. I think it plays differently. Maybe not. Maybe not. These things seem like they're complementary to me too at first blush.
Right.
It feels like the answer is yes, first blush. Is Roger still just typing in chat, or is he not joining? Dude.
It's a form of nihilism. It is a kind of a, denial of life, right?
Well, it's a denial of death too, because as they talked about and as we read in Klosowski, the way that death sort of works is it's constant. Desiring machines die, and that death, as they sort of, see the model of things and then the disconnection happens, the BWO slips between, death is constant for intensities and for existence. So it's the challenge is that once a thing stops dying, it ceases to change. That's actually when it dies. Are you listening on YouTube? How are you doing this? God damn it, Roger. Roger's commenting without being involved in the chat. I don't understand how anything works. Yeah, we have a very talkative chat today in YouTube as well. So it's a good reading. Yeah, he's watching on YouTube. Gotcha. Yeah, this is it. This is Bataille vibes. I got to tell you, this is Klosowski. This is, without a fucking question in my mind, this is Klosowski. We've been reading from Nietzsche and the Vicious Circle. So yes, it's tying into the aesthetic ideal, but it's a shifting of a couple of things that Nietzsche did. And this is straight out of Klosowski. Again, motherfuckers. Man, Vicious Circle's so good. Death is not desired, but what is desired is dead, already dead. Images. Everything labors in death. Everything wishes for death. It's death, as they're talking about it, and they're trying to get away from the idea. They've said explicitly, like, it's not just the old idea of death. That's not like, oh no, it's death as the heat death, the entropic state where things are flattened. The picture that has no life in it, the symbol that has no life in it. It's not alive. It's an attraction to death. Everything labors in death. You labor in symbols. You labor in capital. Living currency from Klosowski goes over, and as they've stated before, that capital is dead. Capital's dead labor. Labor happens, excess happens, and we end up with cash out the other side. And that cash, that capital that's produced, is the sort of actualized, concretized production of this productive process of living things, doing things. And out the other side comes this sort of record of it in the terms of capital. And that capital is stable and sort of, you could say, shelf-stable labor. It's dead. It's fucking dead. It's not doing anything until, you're able to find new living things to infuse that capital with, and then do it again. And then you produce more. And that back and forth is effectively what they're talking about, that it's capital is itself dead. It's an actualized, totalized, stable thing. And so it's not metastable anymore. It's stable. Metastable is cool. Stable's not. This is Simondon. God damn, there's too many thinkers that aren't referenced enough here. This is metastability. This is the odd way things have that, but it's still doing and changing, but the system is metastable. Stable is death. There's no more becoming at all. There's no more becoming. There's no more changing. There's no more potential. It's over. And that's in truth, capitalism has nothing to co-opt. Or rather, its powers of co-option coexist more often than not with what is to be co-opted and even anticipate it. There's no need for capitalism to co-opt external elements because it's already there. Like, capital is already, whatever's done inside of it, capital's like sitting there like smiling, like a gremlin on the wing of a plane. Just like, yep, I'm cool. I'm waiting. We'll see. Oh, hey, we're co-opting this now. It doesn't really co-opt it. It's already part of it. It's not like going out and finding stuff and then taking it over. Right? And that's the line that they have here that is shitting on name a thing. Name a political party that is progressive or leftist ever? How many revolutionary groups as such are already in place for a co-option that will be carried out only in the future and form an apparatus for the absorption of surplus value not even produced yet, which gives them precisely an apparent revolutionary position? This is one of my favorite lines. This is good. People who want to change everything. I could just make a joke here that they're laughing about how over time we've seen literally everyone who's like, we're going to change the world. And it turns out they're like Apple or Uber or whatever. We're going to disrupt. How many revolutionary groups as such are already in a place for co-option that will be carried in the future, form an apparatus for the absorption of surplus value not produced yet, which gives them precisely an apparent revolutionary position? They're making this joke across the board, but it's anyone who claims we're going to change everything. I'm going to change it all. But they're actually already set up in a way that works within capital. So when it needs to, it's there. And you're going to be able to I don't know, sell shower curtains. And make sure that you're doing just a really great job. You get to be revolutionary, but actually serve capitalism. In a world such as this, there is no living desire that could not of itself cause the system to explode, or that would not make the system dissolve at one end, where everything would end up following behind and being swallowed up. Question of regime. If desire actually existed, and it does, children often, but we have repressive mechanisms in place, don't worry. An authentic living desire is going to be revolutionary. It's going to be there. It's going to do things. There's a reason that they have subject and subjugated groups coming up. It's going to be a big deal. Because true desire, like desire freely doing what it's going to do and connecting, would obliterate capital around it. And it's a question of regime, where it's happening and how it's happening, and how systems organize and channel desire. This entire paragraph is about the regimes. It's about understanding how they work together. It's about how they are the same thing, but their interactions are not the same thing. That labor being co-opted, but desire being seemingly free in fantasy. No. Here's how they work. Here's how they set up. Here's how these things go together. And it's a bigger deal. This is not about how capitalism frees everyone, but about how it captures both sides and how we can see it more clearly because of how it does that. Desire becomes alienated, just like labor, but used in different directions and confined in different ways to a de minimis or to a maximus. Like labor's captured to a maximus. That's my very de minimis amount for desire. And ultimately, the phrasing I really like is that we're channeled towards images rather than life, more or less. The symbols, the images, those things. So this is I'm not sure how you could do a more direct critique of psychoanalysis again. Zizek and others always talk about how the world of images and everything is creating symbols that are dancing in your head, like a Christmas nursery rhyme. It's not really that. It's the system and how it co-ops labor and desire, pushes them towards death. Those images are dead. Death is like built in, and there's a push towards that thing, the stability, not the metastable, but the stable, the flattened, the without life across the board instead of that of life. And so it's not the images so much as what the images are. Death, more or less. Homeostasis instead of allostasis. Those are smart person words. But yes, something along those lines. Something along those lines. Do I even want to continue to the next? Good fucking Christ. I'm going to say that 2 paragraphs may sound like not very much. Just biology, very basic. Hello, college kiddo. I read books and everything. I'm joking when I say fancy words. Goddamn people. Yeah, it's gonna be 2 hours. That's a solid reading for 2 hours. Because the next bit, I don't think I can break, even though these next 2 paragraphs are technically broken apart. This does end the section as we move to the second positive task. And I want to be able to spend next week going through these 2, which builds and finishes the first positive task. And then we can spend time going back over the section, and then the following week move on to the next. I think that's going to be the best bet. LJ says, good afternoon, Roger, by the way. Raj. So that's going to be it for today, I think. It's going to be it for today. And later tonight, I'm going to be making my way to Doing another stream, we got some fun React content coming tonight because there is ostensibly one of these weirdos on Alex Jones I'm just learning about. Fancies himself a philosophy expert. So, if you can imagine that sentence I just said being true, I watched like 2 minutes of this dude's stream and I went like, I like the idea, like conspiracy. It's Jay Dyer. It's Jay Dyer. Of course it's Jay Dyer. There's no one else who reads involved with Alex Jones. He's the only person who pretends to read. But like conspiracy theories are interesting to me. They always have been. I used to watch Coast to Coast, or listen to Coast to Coast. I used to record it at night in case I fell asleep. Then I'd listen to it the next day. Art Bell was like a hero for me. And I learned about so many weird conspiracy theories. My favorite still is things like guys who believe they'd taken pictures of fairies in forests. And then like, this was before the internet really. And it was like, as it was starting, it was like 1995, 96. And they would say, I've got them on my website. And you'd go, and they were obviously photos of like a flash with dust or a bug going in that was like out of focus and like had a glow to it. They thought this was a fairy. And they were like, they could not believe it was anything else. I enjoy that. But these are usually things that are like current. When you start getting into stuff like the Masons and things, less interesting. Unless you do what Jay Dyer does, which is tie the Masons to French critical theory. Because the French Enlightenment thinkers came out of Zoroastrianism. So when you start having this kind of stuff happen, I mean, you got me again. You got me again. You hooked me again. That's fantastic. Like, that's like next level fantastic as far as I'm concerned. So it's going to be great. Sunday is streaming some drama bullshit in 10 to 35. Oh, well then let's fuck around for 10 or 15 minutes and we'll raid into Sunday. That'll be fun. But if you never listened to Art Bell, I highly recommend you go back. It was such a big deal. There's an episode of X-Files and Millennium that Art Bell actually starred in, and it's fantastic. The Millennium one is much darker. School bus of kids taken, whole thing, but it's there. He actually plays himself because there's Art Bell Coast to Coast. He just does his show on the fucking on this TV show. Like, that's how big of a deal he was. But it's going to be he's going to be fascinating to watch. I dig anytime people start really conflating stuff they really don't understand to tell a gigantic nightmare of things. Oh, it's good Lord. Do I have recommendations on math books? No. I have recommendations on very, very rudimentary ways to begin to understand things. I had to go back and like I took an online course on calculus. My high school mathematics education was lacking, and my 3 weeks of community college did exactly as well as you might think it will with teaching me anything. But if you didn't know, on the Quarantine Collective's Discord, discord.gg/DGQC, we have a math section where we have hilarious math nerds who are also philosophy nerds, and a couple who are like into the philosophy of mathematics, which is like super nerds. Lesser nerds bow in their presence because holy shit. But we have an entire section for that. So they're actually here to help people understand math. I know. So please do join the Discord. It's fantastic. And we do have a really fun time getting people to sort of make their way through it. Beyond that, if I were to say, I have a feeling I already know what Wig is sending through. Nope, I don't know. I don't know Tibby's. That's fantastic. And then I'm just going to see if Wig has chosen. Oh, no, see, there's one even better. like fun, interesting mathematics shit is going to be 3 Blue, 1 Brown. Probably one of my favorite math YouTube channels. And you should pair it with like actual learning and actual books. As far as reading goes, 3 Blue, 1 Brown is phenomenal. Grant really knows his shit and does a very good job having fun with it, but also explaining things to like absurd details. I like to think he's a kindred spirit, you might say, in terms of like how I handle or how I think about these things. Because explanations are tough and it's tough to do things that you summarize. So 3 Blue, 1 Brown. And he has some fantastic videos specifically if you're interested on how LLMs work. But as far as like mathematics books, that's not my jam. Sorry. I wish I had anything more to say. The closest I get is going to be like symbolic logic and a few other things like that. And that's not really math. It's more the abstraction of logic, which is related, but not the thing. So what can I say? I'm terrible on that. So it's like, yeah, I'm going through my math books. I've got nothing that would be useful. They're all like secondary theory, or I just happen to have a bunch of Whitehead. That's what Whitehead wrote about mostly. So I don't have math books for you. Apologies there. Yeah, we're all dumb in our own ways. I know. This is one of the ways I'm very, very, very dumb. What can I say? But the Jay Dyer thing is going to be really fantastic, I think. And the reason it caught my eye is because of the title of the video. Well, I'll pop it up. Give me 2 seconds. And Roger will like the title too, I think, because it's great. The Worship of Flux. Revolutionary movements are controlled. How controlled revolutions still dupe the masses by controlling the magic circle of what can be discussed. The Worship of Flux. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, it's that good. It's that good.
I want to rewind and go back a little bit to the history of modern revolutionary philosophy. And then we'll work our way up to today, and we'll see how that revolutionary philosophy is.
We'll do 2 minutes as a preview. I'm going to be doing this later tonight. This is just enjoy like the word salad nonsense that comes from this in like every way. It's shocking to me how much, I mean, it
is at work in the establishment's plans for austerity, ESG, lockdowns, and all the measures they want to put in place to enforce a technocracy. Written by a defender of the establishment, Fire in the Minds of Men by James Billington, The Origins of the Revolutionary Faith. He's, of course, not a conspiracy theorist, but a person who was, as an academic and a historian, archiving and chronicling the history of revolutionary philosophy and thought from the time of the French Revolution all the way up until the early 20th century. And
oof. Now, let me share this in Discord. I'm so sorry, Discord. I'm going to force you to watch with us. This is it is next level shit.
James Billington noted that to really understand today's revolutionary philosophies, you have to go back to the faith of the original revolutionaries at the time of and right before the French Revolution and their influences. What were they influenced by? Well, they were influenced by philosophies like Platonism. There was a Byzantine Platonist named Platon that influenced Spinoza. That influenced Weishaupt and other Jacobins. And
it's magical. It's a wonderful way, like, again, he's wrong in this way that is really special, that it takes the conspiracy brain, the hyper-paranoiac mind to do, because linking these things is not wrong, but to say influenced adds a specificity around it. When people hear that, they're going to add or take a claim as something that's a little bit more than it is. These thinkers engaged with classical philosophy. To say otherwise is silly. Of course they were influenced. Like, they're doing philosophy. Nietzsche was influenced by them. Every fucking person is influenced by them. And so as such, you can say person X was influenced by person Y when you want to draw that red string specifically. And using Billington for this is actually kind of amazing, because this is the opposite of how he talks about any of this. There's no conspiracy inside of his work. He uses it, he holds it up. This is an academic. This is a book. It's a real book. I'm not making anything up. None of this shit's in that book. None of the shit's in that book. Like, some of the lines are, but again, he's drawing that red line. Poop, poop. Whoa. This guy influenced Spinoza and the Jacobins. Yeah, that's, if Spinoza gets group with the Jacobins, you got a whole fucking thing coming.
And the philosophy of Pythagoras played a key.
Pythagoras played a key role. What the fuck? That makes it meaningless. That makes it meaningless. Pythagoras played a role. Oh, Pythagoras played a role in what I did yesterday. I mean, I can give you that argument very easily. So it's really fantastic, smart statements that imply a secondary meaning. This is the reason I'm going to be reacting to this. If you didn't watch my How to Philosophy video that came out yesterday morning, it was How to Think. And it was specifically about inference and argument. And it's a series of tools that you can use to understand when inferences are actually being introduced versus deductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning versus deductive. Deductive reasoning is a sort of a closed system of truth. There's always a truth or falsity totality, necessarily in a deductively sound argument. In an inferentially built argument or an inductive argument, the probabilities exist, but people don't really know the difference and they don't consider it. So when you have someone doing things like this, where there is ties, there are connections, but they're saying them in certain ways and they're making implications, then you're inferring. It's kind of I'm not sure it's a possible better example that exists in the world.
Element, as well as the philosophies of ancient pre-Socratics like Heraclitus.
Did you know that the pre-Socratics influenced people? They influenced me. I have books from them. Like,
taught that all is fire and all is flux. And so one of the things,
I bet you he spoke in English too,
that the early Illuminists, people like Weishaupt and a guy called Buonarroti, who were really influential on the Jacobins in the French.
This is why it's going to be fun to go over. Let's go. Let's do it. Because I don't know every one of these fucking names. That some of this shit he's going to be talking about. Who did he bring up?
French Revolution. Buonarroti, who were really influenced. People like Weishaupt and a
Weishaupt. So, in Illuminism, he has picked two people who are not named as writers. That's how important they are. Okay, let's try it again. Weishaupt? I don't know how else to. Weishaupt. Weishaupt. There we go. There we go. Okay. Weishaupt. It's not there. What the fuck? I clicked the link. Andrew Weishaupt became professor. Do you see I'm clicking the link? Like I'm not. Look, Weishaupt. What the fuck, man? What the fuck? Where to go? I hate everything so much. This is Google reconstructing the Wikipedia page. This is Copilot. This is Copilot. This is Bing. That's amazing. I am in love with AI. If you can't tell, it's my favorite thing. Let's try. All search engines are shit. Weishaupt Illuminism. Andrew Weishaupt. Adam.
Real quick.
Yes, Raj. And you're gone.
Yes, I'm closing the sound because I have feedback. But Weishaupt is the one that broke from the Masons and created the Illuminatis and
oh, don't spoil it.
Frame that history.
Don't spoil it for me. I was so excited to learn about this clearly important person who helped build the future of everything. And obviously probably the cave that the 6 Jews live in that control our economy. Shh. You are now underwater and 7 feet away. That's what it sounds like to me. Anyone else have a different way to describe how Roger went from being hearable to whatever the fuck that is? Yeah, someone else said it's water level 7. Yeah. Well, now you're muted. Spoilers. I was looking at, I'm not going to pronounce it right because I don't care about this person. After Probe's Suppressionist Society of Jesus, Weishaupt became a professor of canon law, a position held by exclusively Jesuits until that time. He introduced the empirical philosophy of Feder to the University of Göttingen and became a potent of Kantian idealism. All right, cool. Weishaupt founded the Illuminati. Oh, for fuck's sake. See, as you ruined it. You ruined the surprise for me because I kind of knew it was coming now, but that's amazing. They actually have a founder of the Illuminati sourced on Wikipedia. See, this is how you know it's a true conspiracy, because we know. Weishaupt was initiated into a Masonic... Yes. Oh, my Lord. Oh, my God. This is the whole thing. So what is Illuminism? Let's go back to that. This is the Illuminati, but I want Illuminism, which we had in that other Wikipedia article. Gnostic, Neoplatonist, Swedenborgian, Eastern religions. Oh, for fuck's sake. This is filled with all of the lunatics of our world, isn't it? This is like the worst edit page ever. I can only imagine how much this edit page sucks. Illuminists generally regarded creation as an emanation from God, a religious cult. Okay, great. Metempsychosis, reincarnation, okay, cult. And then that's it. That's the entirety of Illuminism. Clearly worthwhile.
A guy called Buonarroti who were really influential.
Oh, you're back. Hey, Raj.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry about the sound and everything. Go back into the Wikipedia. They say something really important for you. At the end, you just missed it.
No, I have to go back now to the other one, right?
No, that was the correct one. The Illuminist.
The Illuminism. Okay, yeah, I can do that. One sec. Okay. The Illuminists should not be confused with their contemporaries, the Illuminati of Bavaria. That's our friend, isn't it?
Yeah, that's exactly it. So basically, I love this guy already because he's like binding stuff together, doesn't give a shit about context or explanation. He's just like,
Absolutely.
see, Illuminatis, and Lucifer's all the same thing.
Dude, just wait. Just wait, because he's going to bring Zoroastrianism as like the thing that like built into French critical thought. I think
It's all about Lucifer.
it is.
He's gonna end up there at one point.
These people are wonderful. They're just the best.
Influential on the Jacobins in the French Revolution. They decided to take certain symbols from ancient mystical religions like the Zoroastrians. And Zoroastrianism is a dualistic religion that believes that there's always these two principles eternally fighting with each other throughout history, and that never ends. It's an eternal dualistic dialectical battle. That becomes kind of the basis for later Hermetic philosophers like Hegel, who will influence people like Marx.
That's the moment I went, I'm going to watch this entire video. There you go. If you didn't know, Roger, Zoroastrianism is the reason Marx did things.
Yeah.
That was it. That was it for me. I'm like, I'm in. I will strap in. We're gonna do Jay Dyer tonight, and it's gonna be hilarious. And I don't think I can fucking handle waiting, because that's just too magical.
I don't have time, but I think I'll come for
I'm
that.
gonna send everyone who's on YouTube. We're gonna send you off to Sunday. Give him my best, and get to folding your cranes. But I will see you all soon enough. First positive, if I can figure out how to close this. There.